Hello, everyone. I'm Ewan King, and I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of the Social Care Institute for Excellence. And I guess I've been asked to contribute today because I've been involved in supporting a pretty large study on the future of different approaches to housing with care and support. It was called the Commission on the future role of housing and care and support, and we just produced our final report a couple of weeks ago. We looked at quite a broad range of housing or accommodation options for people who no longer can or choose to leave their original homes. So supported living, sheltered housing, care homes, shared lives, home share, a whole host of different models. And by doing this long introduction, I'm buying myself some time to answer the two questions, but I'll give it a go. So what can we do to grab the opportunity? So in the report, we talk about the need for all organizations within a local area, usually called a place these days, to come together and develop long-term plans for housing with care and support for older people and adults. We suggest this because at the moment planning of housing and accommodation is quite fragmented. It's sometimes led by the local authority. It sometimes involves housing associations. It often involves the contribution of the NHS, but rarely do those organisations and individuals and actors in the system get together to develop a single plan. They also rarely involve local people in co-production to develop those plans and involve them in every aspect of designing, commissioning and planning care and support. So I think the biggest solution here should be around getting together within a local area and developing a long-term plan. And that should then feed through into the second solution, really, which is about reforming commissioning. At the moment, commissioning, as we've talked about already today, tends to be focused on buying a relatively buying is the word, a relatively narrow set of services with little involvement of the actual person who might receive those services. So I think we need, and very much focused on the short term. So why I think we need that long-term plan is that we also need to move towards longer-term commissioning budgets and commissioning approaches, which are co-produced with local people. And that allows, hopefully, it signals to all the people that need to actually help build these buildings that there's a long-term commitment to different models and different approaches to housing with care. At the moment, it's very difficult, particularly for a smaller organisation, to invest in building or repairing buildings or setting up housing of different types. So if you signal that long-term intention to improve housing with care, then I think it will lead to better outcomes. So there's definitely a long-term need for local partners to come together over the long term, and also longer term contracts to encourage a different approach to commissioning. And actually sitting underneath all of this, we heard a really good example in a session I was in earlier about how Hammersmith and Fulham local authority has brought together disabled people to talk specifically about disabled people's housing. And it's very focused, and it was over a whole year, and actually more than a year. I think by having that focus and real engagement, it led to a different set of solutions. And some of those are looking really quite good and interesting, particularly supported living and shared lives in Hammersmith and Fulham. So I think there's something about having focused co-production at a local level. How do we influence other people? Just to touch on that, I mean, I think what Social Care Future is doing around the framing of the language and the debate around housing is really important. When we conducted our survey on behalf of the Commission, a lot of people told us that they were still really frightened of going into some care facilities, some care homes. The whole language around it is negative, the whole perception is negative, and yet we've got thousands and thousands of people who are going to want to have choice and influence over where they live. Let's mobilize that group of people to actually influence locally and nationally better choices for them. So I think there's something about that, just carrying on with this movement that's positive about social care and its potential. That's all I'm going to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I invite the next listener, which is Rhiana Summerson. I apologise if I've not pronounced your name correctly.
That was perfect, Clinton. Rayna, yeah, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I did try and join the group a bit earlier. Sorry, I ended up going in the home care one because I couldn't get in because of technical, because I was a bit later. So my name is Rayna Summerson. I'm Group Chief Executive at an independent social care provider. We cover most of the country, not all of it, and about 3,500 team members. And we cover quite a range of services, from home-based care, supported living, care homes, so quite a broad range of services, which gives insight into how people feel about alternative services and options. My background is social work. I just think it is important to say I came into social care when I was a teenager, drawn from life experiences of experiencing family need for care. And then through my career, been a social worker and regulator, and then the last 17 years as an independent social care provider. Through that time, have had to draw on care services for family members, currently trying to draw on care for my mother with dementia, which is proving an absolute nightmare, even though I know the system and I apparently know what I'm doing. So I found this morning actually very emotional watching everything, because it is a stark reminder, of how challenging everything is. That said, your questions, Clinton, I have to agree with you, and I think I'm definitely with the local stuff. What struck me with today is, and I think that kind of answers how many shared issues there are. And I know that people probably think there's a bubble of people who draw on services and what their thoughts are, and then there's all these care providers who think maybe completely differently. And I just think that a lot of the themes coming out when we have discussions here, when I have discussions with other providers, when we ask people who are drawing on our services what they value about what we do or what they'd like to see more of, all those themes that have been discussed today are really strong, absolutely the same messaging. So I think for me, what can we do? I agree, I think we're doing it. I think we can organise ourselves better and, as many people say, recognise what we share. And I think that the social care system, for want of a better word, is full of, it's often accused of being fragmented, and that's why it lacks impact. So this, the system's fragmented, social care providers are fragmented, then there's a fragmentation often appearing about the voice of people drawing on services and providers' view, and yet there's so many similarities. So I think we need to really pull ourselves together, which I think today is an absolute, example of how positive that can be. That this is, how can we organise ourselves to be more combined? How can we combine resources? How can we recognise and share the positive? And again, picking up on what Ewan said around, there are shared challenges, there are shared positives, and let's not write off some of the really positive work that is being done. Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's actually celebrate what is being done well and what that brings to people's lives, because I think we have to recognise, that everyone draws on services at different times in their lives and for different reasons, and not everybody is living a life with all those things we talked about this morning in already. And actually some people don't have them in their lives, and when they come into accommodation, they find those things. And I think that, yes, there's a whole issue. Did they come into that accommodation for the right reasons, or did they come in because there was a lack of choice and a lack of funding and a lack of other things? But actually, let's not forget that there is a lot of positive life experience in those, and how far we've come, because I know as a provider how many people I'm seeing who 10, 20 years ago would have been going into accommodation much earlier and inappropriately, and so because of a lack of other choice. So I think there's something about that. Let's recognise those, and then I think definitely that what can we do to influence and inform and change. I think that leads on from that. I think it's about using very much that local connection, integrated care systems. I think next year, I think there is a great opportunity. There's lots of, again, system issues, transition issues into new ways of working, loads of money and time being spent talking about transitioning into new ways of working rather than actually what are we doing for people, how can that money be spent in communities for people. So there's all sorts of issues, but there's also, for me, all sorts of opportunities about how we can go to that very local network and actually let's get health together, let's get providers together, let's get community catalyst micro provider groups together, let's get people who are drawing on services or who are thinking about when they might need, let's get them together at a very local level and work upwards and outwards, and let's not see the whole system as insurmountable and impossible to change. Let's break it down, which I think today is a great part of. So.
Thank you very much for that, Rhiana. Can I ask Sian to give us your thoughts on the two questions, please?
I can. Sorry, I didn't mean to sound tentative. I can. I mean, first of all, for people who don't know me, I suppose I'm here for two reasons. I've got 30 years of experience of helping local people in local communities set up enterprises that earn money for other local people. I started with the model called Shared Lives, where people open their homes and their lives to the people they support, and they become part of that household, and then moved on to found Community Catalyst with Angela in 2009, and that the aim of Community Catalyst has always been to help people set up very diverse, very wonderfully anarchic enterprises that are designed with people to solve local problems and or to deliver local services or to. Now, some of the early ones that we worked with when we were developing the approach were small care homes, and I think our experience with small care homes made me recognise that many, not all, are able to work in a flexible way to enable people who are living in that home to feel this is their home and they can live the life they want to, and that's almost directly a consequence of numbers. And the second reason I'm here is a personal journey around caring for my mum who died last year, and we experienced both the difficulty of enabling her to stay in her own home. She then moved to my home, and I think there's an interesting question about whether my home ever became her home, because it was my home, and then finally into a care home where she was very, very happy, and it was at the start of COVID. They were wonderful, and she died with love around her. So it was a very good end for her. So there's all that. In terms of, I'm delaying answering the questions, Quentin. So what can we do to grab the opportunities? I think somebody in our last session was talking about the health and social care bill being a potential lever to enable some changes in practice in a number of areas. We've talked a lot about commissioning. Ewan talked about the need to reform commissioning. Certainly, we need to find ways to work with commissioners to help them recognise both different people want different things and how you commission for diversity, and in particular, how you invest in community-rooted services that help people stay local and connected. And I see part of that as a role for Social Care Futures. Providers, I think, as you say, Rhiana, there's great practice, and providers need to be supported to work co-productively with the people they are supporting, and then think imaginatively about solutions and think about things like collaborative working with smaller organisations to bring flexibility that might not be possible within the organisation. And then finally, the regulator. That was always my bugbear when I was part of both Shared Lives Plus and Community Catalyst, because regulators, I think, already recognise that innovation is something that we all want, and yet they don't find it incredibly difficult to regulate in a way that enables innovation to flourish. They managed it with shared lives. They managed a regulatory approach that worked and enabled shared lives families to just be families. They struggle with other kinds of activity and certainly with innovation and diversity. But I'm hoping that the Health and Social Care Bill might be the lever that we need to begin conversations that will change that. And in terms of what we can do to influence people, I'm super practical. So I've got all sorts of ideas on commissioners. Let's get ADAS and regional and national. Regional, we often find easier to work with. Let's get an action learning set for commissioners. I think Social Care Futures is doing that, but it feels to me very, very important that we're influencing commissioners across the board. But also finding ways locally, as Rhiana said, to influence local commissioning at all levels. So frontline commissioning in particular can be a really impermeable layer. So you may have hugely enthusiastic senior commissioners, and frontline commissioning is frightened of blame, is frightened of telling people about really innovative services, and maybe has set views about what's appropriate for people. So there's the commissioners, regulator, well, I think there is a real need for an organisation like Social Care Futures, which I know is small in its structure, but big in its breadth, in its reach, to work with the regulator to start to help the regulator to change the way it's thinking about regulation. I mean, it's rubbish at the moment, isn't it? So excellent stuff is actually really rubbish. And the way in which regulators work doesn't measure the right stuff, in my view. Providers, I really agree with you, Rhiana. I think there's something about working with providers and influencing providers through perhaps provider organisations like VOG and the National Care Forum in particular as the two organisations I would talk about, helping providers to rethink their services, work co-productively with people they're supporting, and be imaginative about how they respond to that. And then there is the framing of the story of social care, which Neil, who's here somewhere, has been instrumental in leading on, and getting that new story embedded in the kind of national psyche